Let's go to the main hypothesis I want to put forward to think about what happened in the advertising side of the market. Because, that's where the distress is coming from for the newspapers. And if we can figure out what happened there, maybe we can think about ways in which the newspapers might come back and the advertising revenue, for which we know there was supply and demand, would come back. What I want to convince you of is that there are only two facts that you need to believe to explain the decline in advertising. First, that the internet has facilitated consumer switching between outlets. Second, that outlets during the period that the decline was occurring had imperfect means of tracking those consumers between outlets. And maybe we'll have that into the future. Let's start with switching. Switching is easier, and by switching I mean that previously you used to read a single newspaper or watch a whole of the nightly news or something like that. Hard to believe, really. But now you pick and choose your sources from different outlets. And what's facilitated? Browsing. The whole idea, you can now browse the internet, find what you want. Because a lot of the content is free, it's very easy to switch and find this stuff. And then aggregators like Google News, social networks, and search all contributed to that as well. A study by Susan Athey and her co-authors discovered that, in fact, Google News, for instance, consumers who go to news sites for Google News consume a set of news from a much larger variety of outlets, and I believe the same would be true of Facebook and even just search in general. So that's all increased switching. Now, what would that mean for our traditional media economics model that was illustrated before, where you put in content and you hope to get advertisers? Well, in this situation, we better add another newspaper to think about that competition. So here's the Washington Post, and they put in their own advertising. And not their own content, and they they sell advertising to advertisers as well. The consumers in the old world would not consume both of these outlets, would consume one or the other, something that we call single homing. Now, if the consumers consume one or the other, that means that once a consumer has come to the Boston Globe, if Zipcar wants to access that consumer, they have to pay the Boston Globe. Or if that consumer ended up going to the Washington Post, if Zipcar wanted to access that consumer there, have to pay the Washington Post. But once they've acquired the consumers, the Washington Post or the Boston Globe is a monopolist over that consumer. So the effect of there being additional competition in the market is not to actually reduce total advertising revenue. Advertising revenue per consumer is still at its monopoly level. Instead, what the competition does is, of course, intensifies it on the acquiring consumer sides, and so you get even bigger reductions in prices. And this is the model put forward by Anderson and Coate. And this model has already had a lot of problems, even forget the decline in advertising, which is a puzzle. We know that competition actually reduces advertising prices in newspapers. This model doesn't explain that. As I just said, competition shouldn't do anything to advertising prices because it should be a monopoly. Outlets claim that mergers will improve ad revenue. Well, how's that going to occur? They say that they're going to consolidate, they're going to have less competition and increase ad revenue. That's the converse. How are they going to be able to do that if they're already charging the monopoly level? For-profit outlets often object to the lifting of ad restrictions on public broadcasters. When the public broadcasters in Germany were allowed to advertise after 8 p.m., you'd think that the for-profit broadcasters would think, woohoo, now they've got to be a level playing field and also show all those annoying ads and they're not going to get all these subsidies. But no, they objected to it. Well, why did they do that? And then finally, the larger outlets actually earn higher ad revenue per consumer. In our little traditional model there, it shouldn't matter whether you're high or low. You should earn the same amount per consumer because you've acquired them and you've got a monopoly over them. The better model, is what I've already alluded to, is not where you have single homing, but where the consumers might consume a bit of both. Okay, it's like multi-homing. Some consumers might be loyal to one or the other, but others might be switching between them. And the question is, what does that do to the advertiser's behavior? And then what does that do to advertising revenue?